get us started. I'll let you know when we're live. And you are live.
You know, and welcome. It's good to see the intelligentsia of the city of Dublin on this cold winter day. I'd like to call the Community Development Committee of January 20th, 2021 to order. Could we have the roll call, please?
Mr. Reiner.
Here.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms.
Here.
Mr. Keeler.
Here.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the September 16th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Ladies first.
Andy moved and I seconded that. That'll be the status quo, Jenny.
Motion to approve. So moved. The minutes. All right. Let's see. First item of business, and I don't know who's going to lead out with this. Is this you, Dana, with the waiver policy discussion?
Yeah, I'll kick it off if that's all right. And there is I don't know if it made your agenda or not. There's a second item we just wanted to touch base on real quick, and that is the topic of the Historic District Task Force that was referred to you all. Just as an initial quick touch base on that. We don't need to spend a lot of time tonight, but maybe talk a little bit about the way ahead. So in regards to the annexation fee waiver, you received a staff report about that. I think that the report did a nice job of going back and sort of encapsulating the history of our annexation policy and all the history of that. Certainly in accordance with the annexation policy, we welcome and are encouraging the annexation before that has already been at Union County and is before City Council. The request associated with this annexation, as you well know, is associated with the fee waiver request. And that's really the issue, I think, that's more before the Community Development Committee this evening. So we do hope that the annexation could go forward either way. But let's address the fee waiver request. As Council well knows, you do have a fee ordinance that's been in effect for many years. You update that ordinance on a routine basis. That fee structure is established to recover costs of service, more so as they specifically benefit the recipient of the services. It's not typically a fee that's serving the greater good, if you will. So that's why we have such a fee structure to begin with. You all know the philosophy of that as well as I know it. One of the key points here is that I do not, as city manager, have the authority to waive such fees because they're set by ordinance. Therefore, those fees any request for fee waiver, really no matter how small or how large, comes to City Council for your review. I think the staff report did a nice job, as I mentioned, not only the history of the annexation policy, but also laying out a lot of the waivers that have happened over the years. Doesn't get into a lot of details on those, but what I can tell you through my own experience, and Paul can chime in on this too, because we were kind of swapping stories as we could remember them on these as best we could remember. These have been associated with hardships. Hardship could be associated with ability to pay, or it could be more so about the need for water, sewer service, hence an annexation due to a failed system. That can also tie into an environmental concern that needs to be addressed, where we've had history of those. If it's public property, i.e. the city, of course, the city's not going to charge itself, or if it's Washington Township, you've seen Washington Township in the list. We don't charge another public entity. In the case of the church, you could also make that same argument for a not-for-profit, although generally speaking, we would still apply the fee. The council knows you had a not-for-profit recently come before you for a fee waiver, and that was not granted. In the case of the Dublin Methodist Church, it wasn't so much about that they were a not-for-profit or because they were a church, although I don't really get struck by lightning for this. But the point is that Baptist church was specifically in an island along Kaufman Road. And I do remember a time, because I've been with the city probably too long now, where we really had a very aggressive effort in trying to clean up what we called islands of township within the city corporate limits where the city completely surrounded pockets of township. And we have, over the years, really wanted to incent people to annex if they were in those islands. The church was an example of that. The Eggsbuehler property, generally across the street from the same church, was the same example. There still remains a couple of islands, and Andy, those are your neighbors, I believe, that are not in the township there. And the reason I'm raising this is because those two particular, Kaufman Road at Kaufman and Brand, is where we've had a pretty significant island of township within the city that over the years we've tried to incent to come into the city for service reasons, consistency of service, and so forth. And then the last reason we would typically waive, and I noticed a couple on there that I would say were more along the lines of economic development opportunity. I believe the Costner ones, the ones out on Post Road, I believe it was, were more associated with the opportunity for economic development. So those were the reasons, I think, fairly consistent in the waiver policy. Not waiver policy, but the practice, I should say, of waivers. So again, I just want to tee this up with, we certainly welcome the annexation by Mr. Cortola, excited to have it. It's the issue of the fee waiver itself. I certainly recognize Mr. Cortola's comments about being a longtime Dublin resident, growing up here in Dublin and so forth. We know he's a business owner here in Dublin. I would remind you, we have done economic development incentive projects with Mr. Cortola before. I would certainly encourage you to, stay focused on that separate from the residents. And that's really where it comes down to staff's recommendation to not waive the fee. Not because we don't think, that anyone's deserving of waiving a fee. It's the consistency against your own policy. And we think that it's a little bit inconsistent relative to the other ones that have been waived before to waive this. So again, nothing against Mr. Cortola. Would love to have his property in the city. It's all about the issue of the fee itself. And I would just say for the record here and as a reminder that I think water and sewer is right at the edge of his property. I hope that he will annex and pay the fee unless council chooses to waive it. Either way, hope he brings his property in. Water and sewer is readily there at his property. But I just say this up front, the city does not have a practice of waiving water and sewer tap fees or extending water and sewer lines on a individual property basis, even on a development basis, unless we're extending water lines consistent with our infrastructure extensions, or we're doing significant widenings and things like that. Even the Mullins situation in the waiver, and I think there was another one, Har, I believe, was the other homeowners who were waived. We were anticipating extension of roadways across their property. I think at about the time we were also contemplating the waiver of those properties. So just a little bit of background. That's pretty broad stroke background there, but I just wanted to raise that. And I think I'm going to hand this over to Thad. I don't know, Thad, if you have anything that you wanted to mention. Paul's got as much history or more than me on a lot of this. He's been around probably too long and has some recollection of these. And again, I'm not saying we've got it all exactly right, but that's our recollection on the waivers.
Yeah,
thank
I think
you.
you covered it very well, Dana. I really don't have anything to add to what your comments were. So good encapsulation.
Thad, do you have anything you want to mention?
I was just going to say something along the same lines as I believe it was Paul who said that, Dana did a thorough job of covering what we did in the memo. And I would, throw it to Matt if there's anything further to say with regard to the specific fee calculation.
Okay. Well, let's
I have
let's have
one
a
question.
okay.
I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, it was my understanding in the council meeting that what they were referring to committee was the review of the fee waiver policy. I don't know that it was a role of this specific case, and I guess I would like to ask my fellow council members what their reaction was. I think this is probably a question for the whole of council, and it was my understanding that we were to review the fee waiver policy.
That is my recollection as well. And staff has done a good job of providing us with background on what the current policy is. My understanding was that we were to take the current policy and see if it's specific enough, how it's implemented and that kind of thing. And Dana, I appreciate your background as well. You mentioned hardship, islands, and economic development. Those are the three policy specific policy issues that I believe are not necessarily that evident in the current policy.
Yeah, I think it was this particular applicant that sort of threw us into this discussion. Is the way I sort of see this thing evolved. The question came up. You got somebody who's doing a lot of economic development, asking for a fee waiver. And I sort of seen this as, when we were sitting there that, okay, it's time to hash this thing back out. Now, this isn't the first time we've discussed this. We've been pretty dogmatic over the years about following this with the exclusion of the things that Dana mentioned, the hardships. And we've been even tough on churches. We've made everybody pay their fair share. And we had I think a policy that this is what we're going to do, and we're going to follow this policy and down the line. So I guess in this case, I'd like to hear what you, my committee members, feel about this particular case. You've heard the background. We're trying to follow a policy of recovering our expenses. This guy is obviously an interesting case in that he's ready to do some economic development, but as Dana said so clearly, this doesn't exactly fit the way we've been doing this up to this time. So it's really open for discussion, and I think we should go back to City Council with some kind of recommendation on this policy, keeping it the way it is, or in this case, waiving it for this particular applicant. So I want to hear what you guys got to say about that.
So from my reading, I think we're talking about waiving a fee as opposed to necessarily the policy for annexation. So the document that we have outlines reasons for annexation or purposes, the mission of annexation, why you would do it. It doesn't necessarily talk about the exceptions to a fee. So for me, I would add language to this document that more or less indicates that potential exceptions for or reasons for a waiver of the fee would be financial hardship as defined by something, islands, which is already in the document as a purpose or mission for annexation, but it's not related to waiving the fee. And then the third would be economic development. In this particular case, I don't see that this case meets those three. The business side of Mr. Cortola's, those are the business ventures are a separate entity altogether. So looking at his primary residence, I don't see that it meets my reasons for waiving a fee.
Andy, I think I'm completely in agreement with what you just said. That's sort of my analysis after reading my way through this thing and remembering the last 30 years of these cases, you might say, and how they came up. Chris, your comments?
I would agree with Andy, except for the part as it relates to this particular case. I don't think that we were charged with talking about this specific one. I think we were charged with talking about the policy. As I recall, there were members of council that were not aware that we had a policy, and they wanted to make a policy decision. And so they asked us to look at a policy or develop a policy, whichever was appropriate, and come back with a recommended policy to them for which they could line up this particular application with a policy to judge it against. I think that the hardships, the islands, and for economic development purposes, are the right to be mentioned in a policy, and it is the right criteria that we should hold up these fee waiver requests against.
Okay, so I think we're all in agreement and hard and fast that those are the three major items. Is there anything else the staff would include in this?
Yeah, I would ask if you were going to define it this way, that you would probably add public property, because we often interact with not only our own property, but as a city, but with Washington Township, could be others in the future, but public property. And then hardship, I know Andy was kind of reaching for what might that be, right? So it could be financial. I think that's up to the individual to make the case for financial hardship. I don't know that you could really, lay all the rules out for that. I know when I was on the Board of Health and we looked for years and we looked at hardship and waivers and the like, variances, we called them for things, it was up to the applicant to make their case for financial hardship. We never really had hard set rules around that. The other thing relative to hardship, and maybe Paul can expand on this, is if you have a system breakdown, part of what we want is we want properties that are adjacent to services or very close by. If they have a system that goes bad, be it their on-site treatment system or their well, we want them to get access, and hardship can actually become environmental in that sense. I don't know, Paul, if that's the right way to define it or not.
Yeah, and I think we treat it as a health and safety concern that, to incentivize folks addressing that health and safety concern. And we'd rather that they, I guess, spend their effort and their resources getting connected to essential services than maybe the annexation fee itself. Recognizing that there can be a significant cost getting connected to our system.
I think probably you'll have everyone cite that is coming in that isn't currently on the public water sewer network. Hardship could also be site conditions. You might have some sites that require, maybe they're along the river somewhere. You have bedrock 8 inches below the surface, and it's going to be tremendously costly to put that in. So, if we would have just a failure in a system be the criteria, I think everyone could make the case that their system is at some point of failure, right? So it's not a question of if, but when. So, but Laura, I'd be interested. I know you do a lot of work on this kind of thing, to hear, your experience on that and what your thoughts might be.
And Mr. Reiner and members of the committee, if I may, sorry to step on Laura there, but I did just want to clarify what was in front of the committee this evening. There was not a final decision made by council on this individual fee waiver request when it was in front of council in August. And so both this particular waiver and the topic of the waiver policy in general was sent to the committee for its consideration and recommendation for council. So I think we have two separate questions. One, the recommendation for or against this particular fee waiver, and two, whether the existing fee waiver policy referring to economic development opportunity and hardship needs to be made more specific to further guide council in the future. So just to set the table for what was in fact referred back before Laura, Ms. Comack has a chance to speak so that she can address everything that's in front of the committee this evening.
Thank you for that clarification. And I don't know if maybe you could, or maybe Dana could, but I remember a lot of economic hardship cases that came up, But, that'd be a tough thing to define if it wasn't a case by case basis. I don't know if there's any legalese that could solve that particular Gordonian knot. I mean, because they're all different from ones I've seen in the past years and years. So I don't know if we could codify that in some way. I don't know what your thoughts or what the committee's thoughts are on that, on economic hardship. I mean, you can't put a dollar amount on it. There's so many variables in it. It's hard to pin down.
Thad, can I just clarify? I want to make sure I understand what you just said. The council charged us with reviewing two things tonight. One is this specific case and making a recommendation to council. And the second is reviewing the policy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And in fact, I have the minutes of that meeting before me that state it was in fact Councilmember Fox who moved to table this Mr. Cortola's request and send it to the committee. And then Ms. Aludo seconded. And as this committee being the venue in which to discuss the waiver itself, this particular waiver further, and then also being the committee appropriate for general waiver policy moving forward.
Okay.
Okay. So we have before us a two items of business in this particular category. So let's first discuss whether this particular applicant deserves or does not deserve to have this waived. Based on your readings, we all read the stuff the city sent out. We looked at the three general criteria: financial hardship, islands, and economic development. That's been the past criteria that I can recall for the past 20, 30 years. So, let's have a discussion on that. We should make a recommendation from this group to city on that particular issue. So go ahead again. Andy, if you want to make a comment, and Chris. Andy, go ahead.
So as I said, I don't think this particular case meets any of those three criteria. So, based on my understanding of the intent, I would deny this request.
Okay. Thank you. Chris?
I would agree with Andy based on, the language that's in the policy. I would agree a little bit with Dana to keep some flexibility in the policy. Whenever you're trying to do economic development deals, you certainly want some flexibility in that. If it's an avenue to open up additional areas for future annexation or something along those lines.
I would piggyback on that and what you said, John, regarding flexibility on hardship. I guess my thought is, based on Dana's comments, hardship could be defined as a variety of different things. But hardship is a criteria, and no matter what it is, it's going to be reviewed by council anyway, right? It's, in other words, there's not going to be a situation where a fee waiver request is granted without it coming before council. So that means that you have a body of individuals that are making a decision based on the facts that are presented on that particular case at that particular time. So to me, leaving it a little open-ended is fine. It has to come before the committee or the council anyway. But I think having, the three: hardship, islands, and economic development specifically laid out, it gives us, I guess, a guide.
Right. Okay. So, any other comments related to this portion of the discussion? Anybody wish to comment? I have to agree with both of you that and as much as I appreciate Mr. Ciatola, his work he's done in the city and stuff, it's hard to categorize this into the three criteria that we had set forth over the years. And I mean, we much appreciate, his development and what he's done to this community. So I take it that we would agree with the recommendation of the city government for not approving this fee waiver. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't know if Ms. Comack has or should have anything to say, but that's my statement.
Laura? You want-
Let's hold off on that, Councilman. No, actually, I would like to defer to Peter on the front end of just a couple of these comments. And
Okay. Thank you. Peter,
Sure.
please.
Yep. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
First off, thank you for your time, Council. I appreciate also the kind words on the professional side. And I do want you guys to at least know from my standpoint, I understand that there's a clear separation between my professional side and personal. When I initially wrote the proposal for the fee waiver, me outlining my relationship from a economic development side from my business was more so just to reiterate my commitment and my long-term standing with the city of Dublin. It was not supposed to be utilized as any kind of leverage of saying, look at all I've done, I deserve X, right?
Okay.
I do think it's important to understand that my initial request for the fee waiver was, it was just for the clerical fees that are outlined and broken down in the report, the $4,200 or some change. It's not a request to waive the tap fees, right? And I'm not questioning the amount of it. I understand the cost of doing business, and I understand that there's a lot of work that goes into these back end provisions. But it wasn't to waive all the fees. It was the initial annexation fee of $4,200. And I was hoping the council would consider the request relative to the circumstances. I personally have a lot of cost into just annexing into the city of Dublin. I already am district into the school system. My Peter Joseph goes to Glacier Ridge. Benjamin will be going there in 4 years, and my son that's here to be born here in February will go there in 7 years, right? I obviously get to reap the benefits to an extent already, but it was more so from the standpoint is I have a lot of costs to really just finalize just now I'm in Dublin when I'm already reaping some of the main benefits, but in Plain City. I have a lot of costs with the tap fees. I have a very wide yard. The utility extension fee is a very hefty fee. Laura's fee or the legal fee, that's a big fee. Also, right? That's why she really wanted to get on this call. No. I'm sure there are other fees that'll come down the line, right? We plan to build a house there. So I got a lot into it. And I'm not claiming economic hardship. I don't reserve the right to do that. I understand that's reserved for other people in different situations. I can't make a fair case for economic development outside of utilizing the business side, which is not fair to anybody else. It was more so the relative circumstances that I am getting some of the benefits already, really the benefits that attract people into our neighborhoods initially on face value. There's a whole list of avenues that attract people into Dublin, but we know the big ones, school, state, all that, right? I have a lot of costs just to get there. And it was just for the council to at least from a relative circumstances to evaluate, understand that we don't need to do it necessarily. Yeah, we want the water. Our reservoir, hard water is very hard. We can't drink it, corrodes our pipes, but I can live with it. Again, I'm not claiming something I can't fix or have the means to. It is though, however, I do have a lot of costs just to really get that official confirmation, the Dublin sticker. So, and that's really what I was asking the council to evaluate. Again, I know I don't meet the criteria outlined in the policy. I don't believe there's an actual waiver policy in place. It's just an annex policy that has provisions or stipulations for when waivers go into place. And that's why it was suggested I apply for it. And that was really the main focus of what I was trying to accomplish. I'm not trying to reap the benefits and not pay my dues. I pay my dues, I pay the taxes. And that's where I just would like the city or the council to evaluate from that. So I have a lot of costs just to get there. And I know the tap fees are heavy, and I'm not waiving those. Those are hard costs that go into multiple other buckets. I get it. It was the clerical back end cost of this council would consider.
Peter, thank you for that honest analysis, really. And you're a hell of a corporate citizen, and we really appreciate everything you do. You can sort of see that we've got this set structure that we've been following all these years under these three criteria. And, you know, I get it that you've got all these additional expenses and they are a burden, but by tradition, and I think that's where this thing came from, the city staff, you know, that this doesn't meet our past criteria. I think you understand that. You're obviously an extraordinarily bright guy and an intelligent and fair guy, and it's much appreciated. So in some ways, you know, our hands are tied because the next applicant can say some of the same things. The next guy coming in, and, you know, we had 3 interesting things in executive session last night about possible development, and they could all say, you know, what you said, which, and it is a huge burden to do business in Dublin. And I thank you for mentioning the fact the school system and all the other benefits of living in this community, which is it is an extraordinary community. But you can see that we're also sort of until this law changes or there's some variation to it, that we're sort of tied to financial hardship islands and economic development issues. So you know,
Hey, Peter, I would just add, you know, there are a few benefits in terms of trash services and certainly coming into the township, Washington Township, having that fire and EMS services, and there are some savings associated with insurance. This is exactly the reason why I voted no to refer this to committee in the council meeting, because we do have a policy, and the policy outlines the exceptions. And gosh, as great of a guy as you are, and as much as I'd like to do that, it's not in the policy. And everyone that comes into the city of Dublin and needs water and sewer is going to have a lot of costs associated with getting that up and running. And I am sympathetic, but this is why I voted no, because I treated you unfairly, I feel, in a sense that, you know, nothing's changed since you were before us on council. You know, this was already existing, and for that I apologize. I really do. Should not have drug you through this. But we are where we are, and the policy is what it is, and it is the policy for relatively good reason. And unfortunately, you know, when we would like it not to be the case, it's still the case.
No. And
I hope you know how much we appreciate you.
No, and I think it's worth mentioning for what it's worth. I appreciate the city council to at least allowing the avenue to be challenged and looking further into the policy and taking the time to go through it and not just saying no off the cuff, but at least letting the avenue to explain why it exists and put that time forward and give me this time. So at the end of the day, I appreciate you or all you guys and all the time that at least you allowed the policy to be challenged, which ultimately reiterated the strength in our, you know, the city of Dublin's policies to protect such a great city, and that's why we're there. So again, thank you for that. I understand, but it's one of those things, you miss the shot you don't take kind of deal, right?
yeah. Well, Peter, you can be sure that we did sit down and go through the past policies and read the entire thing. And yeah, I guess, and this is a heartburn for everyone in this meeting right now, is that you're an outstanding citizen. You do great things. You're running a fantastic corporation. And if there was some way that we could bend the law and make an exception for you, you bet your sweet ass we'd do it for you, because you're that kind of guy. I'm just going to tell you. And there's everybody that we're talking to that's hearing this already knows this, and the rest of city council knows this, and we all appreciate everything you're doing for this community. So if there's a way to change this that we thought was fair, Peter, you'd be number one in line. And I'm just going to tell you that. And that's the way every one of us feels. So, but we are bound by tradition and what we've worked out the last 20, 30 years to try to manage this thing and keep it manageable as each applicant has come in. Some people with hardships because they're, as we're starting to mention, their sewers have failed and they don't have any money and their septic system's gone, and now they need to tap into our system, which is going to cost them an arm and a leg because they're going to be a long run to reach the tap from their property. And God, the guy's 70, 80 years old, and his well's only 60 feet deep, and it's now failing, and now he's thinking he's poisoning his family. So we've listened to a lot of these cases over the years, and but I'm just going to tell you, we really appreciate who you are, and we take this with the utmost seriousness. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess it is the, we are going to, as a group, from what I've understand, we're going to agree with the ruling by the city staff. We can't give a waiver on this, and I guess we'll call for a vote on that.
Can you clarify what we're voting on and what make a motion in an affirmative or a negative so that we have a...
Yeah, we're making a motion, unfortunately, not to approve the city or not to approve a waiver for this particular applicant. So an affirmative vote would be, yes, we are not going to approve this. So I suppose...
If I might make a suggestion on the form of the motion, just as a general practice, to move in the affirmative, so it would be a motion to recommend approval, so that then a no vote is non-approval, just for the sake of clarity.
Okay, you want a no vote is not approval. Okay.
Correct.
Would you like to call the motion there?
So I'd like to make a motion to approve the fee waiver for this application. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Very good.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms,
No.
Mr. Reiner,
No.
Mr. Keeler.
No.
Well, thank you. I thank you, Peter and Laura, for your time tonight. Much appreciated. And yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Let's get down to the actual, any variation on our current, Chris, you brought up the health and safety thing and brought up a very good issue that every person that would be looking at this would say, hey, my condition on this is such that that I want a waiver. So, I think if that's number 4 on the list, I think it deserves some discussion.
I grew up on a well. Our well was in a constant state of failure. It was in septic. You constantly were bringing somebody in to pump something or drop a new, centrifugal pump in the well. And it's kind of like a car, right? Your car's in a constant state of failure. The tires are wore out, that needs an oil change, whatever it is. That is, that is private water and sewer condition, period. So, I think it would be, I wouldn't necessarily want to put that in the policy unless we were going to grant every request, because
Chris, I got to just tell you some background because, we started that whole expansion of the SOAR thing to try to help the people with septic systems. And what we found out that was very interesting, and the Iger boys and all these other sewer driller guys we use in our industry to do irrigation projects. And what we found out that I thought was very interesting was some of these wells along the Scioto, these people only drilled down 50 feet. Some of them were 95 feet. And it was laughable because they said, hey, my water's failing. My comment to them would be, drill a deeper well. Time's moved on. The water table's changed since the pioneer days. and you probably have to suck it up and drill a deeper well. Well, it came back that no, we want a free sewer and water, or free, no, it's really behooved you to take the expense and drill a deeper well. So
I think, John, that's why
I think you got a good point there. I think your point's excellent.
I think that's why it's so important that we at least get water and sewer extensions designed, because we are closing in probably rapidly on well water not being safe to drink in this city, and it's going to happen overnight, right? It's not going to, although it is happening gradually, it will become known overnight. And
Right.
so I think that was a really responsible decision made by council when they made it about extending water and sewer and paying for that. And I think it's responsible also that we at least have it designed so that when the thief comes in the night, we've got something prepared the next day. So
My thought, again, is to keep it a little vague: hardship, islands, and economic development. And since council has to review every case anyway, we can determine, is there consensus that this particular case meets a hardship of any kind, whatever that is?
Okay.
I can tell you every single property along the river is going to come with hardship, because the cost to drill through the rock to get down to their home and the lift station to get the sewer back up to the street. I don't disagree with you, Andy. It's just eyes wide open that probably most everyone that comes in is going to be the case. They're going to say, hey, it's going to, I got to pay $15,000 in tap fees for water and sewer, and then it's going to cost me another $20 to get it up and down the hill.
Okay, you guys have a lot more experience, real life experience with these residents than I do. So Dana, when you mentioned hardship, can you give me examples of how that would be applied?
I would agree with you, Councilmember Keeler, about keeping a little bit vague. I would put the burden on the resident to prove hardship. And I would simply say it's financial hardship, or it's a failed system hardship that must be addressed. And I would keep it more vague than I would try to nail it down. And I really think that's about the two buckets that it's going to fall in. Wouldn't you agree, Paul?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's where it's going to fall. And the demonstrated part of it to me on the water and sewer side is, action by Franklin County Public Health or someone regarding their on-lot system. And
that's a great point, because in our policy about water sewer extension, if we go ahead and extend the water sewer line, and Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, once that water and sewer line is extended and they have a system failure, then they will have to connect under Franklin County Public Health, because if you're within so many feet of the line, you have to connect if your system fails. They're not going to reissue you a new permit.
That's correct.
But we also have to be careful not to confuse annexation fee policy with water sewer extension fee policy. These are really two different things and act two different ways.
So help me out here. Chris is basically saying, and my mind is kind of going to the next step. If I want to be annexed, I want city water and sewer, and I want the fee waived. I just let my septic system go to pot, and then I come before you and I say, my system failed through no fault of my own, and it's going to cost me $8,000 to replace the system. Would you please waive my $4,700 fee?
I don't think it's that easy. I think there's permitting processes, there's records. Those things can be checked and verified through the county health department, be it Franklin County or Union County. Those kind of records can be checked as to whether it was let go on purpose or not. And I mean, there's more hoops to jump through than just showing up and saying, "Look, my system failed." So,
okay. Hey, historically, Andy, I can tell you that when we did this, we thought We weren't sure. Actually, we had a whole bunch. Well, we had a group of people that wanted the sewer, the water. They came in. So we listened to them. Now, there's always this verbal front group that was burbling out. Well, then came the next group, which was quite a bit later into this thing, and said, we don't want the sewer and the water, and we don't want the expense, and we want you to change the law because we don't want to hook up to your sewer and water. Okay. So that group came out, and that group was actually, as I recall, guys, and I think Dana would remember this, and so would our engineers, that group was larger than the first group that came out and said, hey, our systems are failing. So then we had this clash between these two groups, and that's why the law is so strange, and it's also so generous to people that hook up, because we had this infighting. And what Dana said is true. When you examine the case one after another, they said, no, we're going to buy another, we're going to drill our well deeper, or we're going to buy a new septic system, and we have this kind, and we think it's better, and we don't want to hook up with you guys. We don't want to spend the money. So we had this clash of personalities, you might say, and what was a goodwill policy on our part to try to resolve this problem, which has to be resolved, and as Chris said, was pretty progressive for what we were doing. So that's how this thing shook out. It's really quite interesting, and it depends on how people feel about their personal home and their sewer and water situation. That's just general background, but we went through endless meetings on this thing, trying to resolve it. But so
could this be done by like an appeal sort of process of, if we didn't have the financial hardship or component in there, could we allow people to appeal on the basis of financial hardship? I hate to just put financial hardship in there because that's a difficult thing to quantify. But if we had a line in there or something that said, extreme hardship cases can be, appealed on a case by case basis or something along those lines. I just, fortunately, Peter is so honest, right? And he says, I don't have a financial hardship. I just appreciate his honesty in that. But that's rare, right? There's not many people that would apply for this and say, hey, listen, I could pay for this all day, every day. I just want you to pay for it. So I am sympathetic with Andy's desire to have the hardship quantified, right? That it's based on something for these conditions. I hate to just have it in there because then we're just going to be flying by the seat of our pants again. We're going to find ourselves in this same predicament and where we shouldn't have been here in the first place.
Well, the only other thing I would add is if an applicant or not an applicant, but someone requesting for a waiver due to financial hardship, I mean, all you're saying is, look, the burden of proof is on them to come forward with the information, not just because they say I have a financial hardship. Well, that's not good enough. I mean, you have to come forward and demonstrate why that is, what that is, what that is, not necessarily why, but what that is. And then to your point, it's a case-by-case basis. And I'm only telling you that, I know that sounds vague and nebulous, but the burden is not on you. The burden is on them. And they have to satisfy whoever's reviewing that, namely city council, in a public meeting, that their financial burden is significant enough that it gets frankly, pulls to your heartstrings, and you say, look, yeah, we sympathize with that. We want the property in. We're willing to waive it for that reason. I mean, that's my experience in working on Board of Health with variances. We got some pretty bad cases of people needing to relocate a wellhead or whatever and trying to get a variance so that they don't have to relocate the wellhead and so forth. And they would come in and tell you what their financial issue was. And believe me, it's pretty apparent when they do. So, I mean, that's just my own experience. And again, those rules are a little bit vague. It doesn't mean you have to do it that way. I'm just trying to share with you how that can work. So,
and just to,
and what Dana said is true. We actually have had people come to city council with their well drilling log. And actually, it was something I was very interested in because knowing the depth of water in that area because of all the systems I sink for my irrigation and other stuff, it was interesting to listen to them, and you go, that's really not a hardship because your well really isn't deep enough. How old is your well? Oh, 40, 50 years. Well, that sort of takes us out of the hardship zone. The hardship is, do you have enough money to drill a deeper well? So, I mean, that's the kind of minutia we actually got into on these cases. And so, to try to move this thing along, I think I agree with your comments about really on the keeping the financial part of this fairly nebulous. And the other two items, I think ought to be continued as our policy. So, and I think that's where this thing probably should remain. I mean, any other comments? Or I guess there's two of us that sort of agree to that particular aspect of this.
Mr. Chair, I would still ask that you consider adding public property in there for waiver, just so and I know that's kind of a given, but just to make sure we state that openly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are we if we could vote and send this on to our colleagues, can we say it's financial hardship, islands, economic development, and public property? Can we get a positive vote for that?
Chris, how do you feel about financial hardship? And
I
again,
think probably your environmental hardships are going to be more significant than the financial hardships, but
I guess as I said, all of these cases are going to go through council, and it's a group decision anyway. So it's not like we're making a hard and fast rule that staff can approve if they meet these criteria. You know what I mean? So
well, we don't ever allow financial hardship to be an issue. I mean, if someone's building a house or whatever, and they're saying, well, I need to put something on the side of my house. I can't afford a hardy plank, but I can afford aluminum siding. It's a hardship. I can't afford hardy plank. We've never, supported financial hardships. Now, that doesn't mean this is more of a life issue than the siding on your house. I don't know that I would state it as a hardship, financial hardship. I would probably state it as a hardship and let them make their case of what the hardship is.
Okay.
So you're saying you're okay keeping hardship?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm good with that.
Can we take out the word financial and vote for the islands, economic development, and public property, and pass that back to City Council, our colleagues?
Yeah, sorry,
So those are the recommended updates to the policy, that the policy consideration criteria would be hardship, removing islands within the city for purposes of economic development, and for the incorporation of public property.
I'll second that motion, Chris, if that's a motion. Because I think that's where we're all at. Andy, any other comments?
Nope, I'm good.
All right.
Hey, Thad, did you have something you wanted to add in there?
Yeah, I was just going to make sure that we were clear that the additions to the policy in terms of public property and the annexation of islands was specific to the annexation fee waiver, because the way that it's structured now, the waiver language on the final page of the memo we provided is generally applicable to all of council's fees. So economic development and hardship would be reasons that council might choose to waive any of its fees. But with respect to annexation, is the intent to have those two and additional factors of island and public property.
So this whole discussion is only as it relates to annexation, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the annexation policy discussion.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
So we'll bear that in mind as we prepare the language for council.
Could the clerk call the question and we'll get on with this?
Mr. Reiner,
Yes.
Mr. Keeler,
Yes.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms.
Yes.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that enlightened discussion. Let us move on to the final issue. Dana, are you leading out with this?
I'm actually going to pretty quickly turn it over to Tammy Noble. Again, we didn't want to go real deep on this tonight. We just know that this topic got referred to your committee, and we just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about how you might like to proceed on the Historic District Task Force recommendations in terms of, just going forward and how you might want to address it. That's really what our focus is about. Unless, Tammy, there's something else you want to add to that, or Jenny.
No, I just in general, we want to make sure that we start implementing policies from the Historic District Task Force that was presented in January, beginning of January. We're eager to get moving, but there's quite a few tasks that we have to do. And of particular interest for us is the idea of managing the district. So I started doing some research, and we wanted to, and it was a great recommendation to bring it back to this committee to talk about what your thoughts are before we get too far into our research of this topic. So what we're asking from the Community Development Committee is to help us formulate how we move forward and make these implementation strategies work. So I can give you all the research that I've done so far. I have reached out to other communities, but at this point, I'm just looking for we're looking for some direction in what your thoughts are.
Hey, Tammy, for me, I think in terms of management of the district, if we want to take that bite at that apple first, I think council needs to be more aware and really understand what we are spending in the district at present in terms of contributions to the HDBA, staff positions that are housed in the Visit Dublin offices now, and those kinds of things, and really understand what the spend is as it exists today versus what the spend would be if we had somebody managing the district, be it full-time or a subset of someone's job, and other duties assigned, as Dana would say, right, for someone that's existing, to assign the management of that district. Because I don't know that all of council really understands, and there's different places in the budget where money goes to the historic district, facade grant program, all of those kinds of things is a holistic look of what are we spending there? What are we getting for the money that we're spending? What if we had somebody manage the district? What would that cost, and what would we get as a result of it? That's what I would need to have that discussion in a meaningful way.
Understood.
Andy, comments?
So I support, I guess I would say I support change, because whatever organizations we have in place that are supposed to be keeping the historic district from being blighted is not working. So I support doing as Chris said and evaluating the financial end of it, but also being open to refiguring how management of the district would operate, and using, say, Over the Rhine and other neighborhoods around the state or around the country that have had success. And my only thought is, other than something needs to change, is it should change quickly, because South High Street in particular is, I would consider it blighted, and certainly in the context of Dublin, South High Street is an eyesore in spots, and it's definitely not getting the love that North High Street is getting. So I would be in favor of moving very swiftly on this component of the task force recommendation. A lot of their other recommendations, I really think before we put the cart before the horse, we start looking at the 2035 framework and how these different components that the task force brought before us would fit into the different areas. But you know, the financial model, as Chris said, and you know, what money is being spent and what it would look like, and what this entity, say a nonprofit entity, where they would get funding from, and if the city essentially just rechannels the money we're already putting into the district through this entity, you know, I want to explore that very, very soon.
Okay. And my
I would
comments
agree
are,
with that, Andy, and I think part of it is, you know, with the facade program, I felt like we really got some improvements in the district, right?
Yeah.
That was a great catalyst that staff had identified, you know, from our Beautify Your Neighborhood grants to go into this. And I think that moved the needle more than anything else we've done in the district since we put sidewalks in, right? Like, this was the next thing that had happened. And you know, I would like to know what if we tripled the money we put in that versus hired a staff to walk up and down the street and talk to the tenants, right? Who largely don't own the buildings. You know, I just want to understand that. I agree with you 100% that it needs to be relatively swift. But you know, I don't know. I really want to understand, is a staff person the right solution for that? Or if we take you know, whoever we hire, it's going to cost us at least $150,000 at the end of the day, right? By the time we pay all of the associated fees of hiring an individual for $50,000, $70,000, $90,000, whatever, it's going to cost us at least $150,000. What if we just spent $150,000 every year on redoing the fronts of those buildings and making them more valuable and making the blight go away? So when I want to know what those numbers look like, that's why I want to know. And I agree with you that it needs to be expeditious.
you know, Chris, I agree with you, and Andy too, really. I'd like to know, you know, we have over the years, we've thrown all kinds of money down there. Some of it really wasn't successful. We threw money at it left and right, actually. And it's time to, and you know, part of it, the south part really wasn't as dynamic restaurant wise, you know, and Chris makes a good point. The landowners aren't the landowners. There's people, they're tenants, and that had complicated all kinds of issues over the years, and trying to get them on board with us on different programs that we kept bringing up, and you know, the blowback. But so I think I'd like to know what Chris and Andy both said. You know, what's the total expense? What are we putting in there? Where can we direct it? In 1992, I started a program to beautify downtown Columbus and went down there and put pots and plants up and down all the streets because I was tired of the hillbilly look, and every other advanced community in Europe had street tree plantings and had flower pots out, and I just got sick and tired of it, and I was sick and tired of listening to my dad tell me about it for the previous 30, 40 years. So I walked down there and went door to door to every business up and down Broad Street and High Street and signed them up. It took me 5 days to do 150 pots. Well, later on, that morphed into a community development thing where they started assessing people per lineal foot and got them, and they started having people picking up trash and everything else, and I got out of it. So I have a lot of experience in this, but I too am very, very interested in seeing, you know, where this money could be redirected and where we could really put money to make the big impact. So, you know, I agree with both of you guys. So, Tammy, is that what you're looking for?
It is, yes, absolutely. We didn't want to get too far down the path before asking your opinion. And we did start to do some internal research. Megan's been so helpful in helping us assess what we're already doing that could lead to these recommendations. And so we have committed on our part that we'll continue that. And it seems like that's something that you've just reiterated. So that's something we'll gladly do.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, you know, because I can remember issues where we were shot down by the people holding the businesses, and then the tenants really were interested in the parking, resolving the parking, but you know, we just couldn't get the synergy. There was some entrenched individuals that we couldn't move, And a lot of frustration over the past 30 years where we tried to advance their situation and had a lot of blowback. So I think that's all changing. And I think Bridge Street has put enough pressure on those people that they're thinking, hey, we got to get back in the game now because we're not the only game in town. So I see some attitudes changing down there slowly from the landowners. So maybe we can finally get something done and help them move that thing on. So,
Yeah, I think, Chris, the comment about the facade grants, that's pretty much a no-brainer. I mean, that's like shooting ducks in a barrel. It's working. We know it works. What I'm more interested in is a coordinated effort, because it seems like there are a lot of different groups with their hand in the pot down there. Maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 different groups that have a part in the historic district. And I don't know how often they're communicating. I don't know. I feel like it needs to be the Kim Way said, someone that wakes up every morning thinking about the historic district. Some of the folks that are involved down there now wake up every morning thinking about business in the historic district, or hospitality, or restaurants, but it's not, you know, who's going to be thinking about preservation, and that's, you know, something I'm very interested in. And Jane, if Jane were here, she'd enlighten us, but we're losing some of our historic identity down there, and I'd like to see that slow the erosion. So I'll stop.
Mr. Chair, if I could, you know, the one thing I would suggest is that sometimes what we lack is structure, and staffing doesn't always solve that. Sometimes it's structure and collaboration and focus, and how do we create structure around that and the various interests that are involved and have the ability to influence or impact, and how do we structure around that? So that's something that I think we as staff should really go away and research and think about and come back to you on, about structure first, and then maybe staffing later, depending on how things would unfold over time. So you're not leaping, you know, too far ahead, and then you know, it's something you want to maybe evolve over time. And I think that's and I will tell you, I've interacted with the historic district for my entire 33 years with the city as service director, economic development director, and I obviously love it down here. I wouldn't be living down this way, but my frustration, I'll just be real blunt, has been with the lack of collaboration, coordination, focus, and structure. And I think what the Historic Task Force, I believe, finally accomplished was that, in terms of a sense of focus on things that need to be addressed. But we need to wrap, again, I'll say the word structure around that. So I think that's something we probably ought to have a significant dialogue about. The second thing, just as a reminder, you know, the reason we have not budgeted again for the facade program is we determined that we can't really be doing that. So we have to back up and rethink how those facade program can happen. And that will probably have to occur through a community improvement corporation or something, is how that funding should flow. So we're going to need to come back to you also with some thoughts about a different approach to how that program should work. So not that you can't do it, not that you can't get there like you're suggesting or desire to do, but we're going to need to come back and relook, again, structure around how that's done, just so you're aware of that.
You know, I have a question, Dana or Tammy. You know, years ago, we finally ran the sewer down Blacksmith Alley and resolved that issue, that terrible issue we had a long time ago with the water problem. And we put that in and got that resolved. And then we turned right around and tried to do a sort of a corporate thing with those people in the back of their units. We promised to light them because there wasn't enough parking on the south side of Old Dublin. So we immediately came back and tried to get the landowners involved in a program where we were going to utilize the back of their buildings, starting with Donato's and going south. And daytime, we would allow, they would park their, the barbershop guy would park his people there. But at night, it would be turned into a public area. And we were going to pay for the asphalt, the landscaping, the night lighting. We were going to actually come up with, I think there's 1,000 parking spots down there. And we were going to upgrade the entire south side and take it all the way down that street. And all of a sudden we met with, even though we were paying for it, huge resistance. They said, that's a great idea, but we want money too, on top of you guys fixing all this up. And we want to be paid for you using the back of our property to park at night to put some life into this area. So we got in a giant discussion and with them over that. And it got down to, they first applied for, hey, solve our problem. We came in and said, we're solving your problem. We're going to, and this is old information, and we're going to fix this up and make this work for you. And it's going to be landscaped and asphalted, and it's going to be a great space. But then they got down to a sort of a greed issue, and I'll just say that, as I've said some things bluntly tonight. And they said, no, we want money out of you. So it sort of then died again. And so we've had a lot of really good initiatives down there to try to help out. So I'm just curious. I don't know I have a feeling the tenor is changing now with Bridge Street and with some of these guys. And I'm hoping we can start doing some progressive things with these folks and fix this all back up. Because I think, and Dana, isn't this right? Didn't we count 1,000 parking spots one time? Don't we have a study? I know I have a piece of paper that shows all the parking spots that could become available for use down there without building, because we got a huge debate on building a parking garage, or where is the parking? And
I don't think the count was quite that high, but it was pretty significant if you really coordinated it well. So it definitely a difference maker if you could pull it off. And I know that the city has made no less than 3 runs at that, and I know that because I did one of them. Sarah Ott did the other. I think you and somebody else did another, and then there was a fourth run at that privately, and then I did another run at that and trying to just coordinate dumpsters and recycling bins, and couldn't get cooperation on that. So, but it's tough. I mean, it's tough to do when you got a lot of different owners in a small space and to get coordination. But it's not to say it can't be achieved somehow someday. So
we promised them a complete master plan, screening off the dumpsters, striping out parking once we asphalt that whole area, landscaping it to make it look lovely. I mean, night lighting. We went the whole route with them again and again, only to be pushed back. So that'll be interesting. I agree with Chris. I agree with Andy. Let's see what can happen. Let's see if we can push this thing through and get something done finally. So you don't have to walk door to door and beg them.
And John, your point's really well made about Bridge Park, and it could actually exasperate with COVID. I mean, businesses are struggling and they need every incentive they can get to keep their heads above water. So it could change the environment.
Yeah. Well, a little competition sometimes can be great.
Well, we greatly appreciate your feedback, and we'll go work these issues and come back to the committee with some thoughts. We do have a lot of those costs understood. We've done that analysis before, so that should be easy to find. And just some thoughts again on some of these recommendations, and we'll come back with those and bounce them back off of you. And this will probably be a bit of an iterative process here 2 or 3 times to see if we're headed in the right direction. But we very much appreciate your extra time tonight to give us a little guidance.
Well, I want to thank everybody tonight for a wonderful meeting and for resolving these issues. And is there any other comments? Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Guys, enjoy dinner. Have a cocktail. Thanks, guys. Thanks for everything. Appreciate it. Good night.